So welcome to Conversations with Melissa. This is presented by RenaFi. RenaFi provides practical, research-based advice courses and peer support, focusing on the underlying drivers of our ADHD behavior. We provide a holistic program that serves to help you thrive with ADHD, not in spite of it. Visit RenaFi, RenaF as in Frank, I.com to learn more about what we have to offer. And remember to check out our YouTube channel for ADHD resources and information. Without further ado, here we have my guest, our guest. Sari Solden. You've been a pioneer in the field of counseling women and men with strengths and struggles of ADHD for over 30 years. You're an author of 3 popular books on the subject and a well-known international keynote speaker. I wondered, how did your ADHD journey begin?
You know, I always say ADHD saved me from the life of artificiality, conformity, and superficiality that I wanted. I wanted to conform. I wanted to fit in, and I had no idea, you know, what my confusing mixture of traits were all about. I was obviously, you know, smart, a therapist, and I was so incredibly disorganized. I had no idea why, and nobody knew then. I was actually studying minority mental health, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why I've been successful in viewing people with ADHD is more of it's more of a cultural difference, you know, a different group versus some pathology. And so I was actually at one of the only places in the world that had in a counseling agency, had a special program for adults with learning disabilities. And I wound up there for some great events, but I was in this room in the early 90s with all these books about learning disabilities. And I was searching in between clients for organizational problems. What does it mean to be disorganized? Blah, 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 blah. And I was trying to figure out like why, you know, I couldn't sit in the staff room like everybody else and while they're all chatting, or why I had to like stuff the clock in a drawer when I go in this other room and transition to the rooms they put you in, and I couldn't concentrate. And it's terrible. Anyway, luckily it was just great timing. The early 90s, first book on first couple books came out with adult ADHD, you know, Howell Rady's book, you know, which was the first time we understood that adults continue to have these difficulties, even though they might have lost their hyperactivity. And then when I read Kate and Peggy's book, Kate Kelly and Peggy Ramundo's book, I recognized myself, and that was really the first one that spoke about adults even without hyperactivity. And when we soon learned that you never had to be hyperactive, we used to call it ADD without hyperactivity in those days, then that breakthrough for women came through. And, you know, I got diagnosed and treated, and then my world kind of changed. And at the same time, I started studying my clients that I was seeing, and I realized a lot of them did have ADHD, not just learning disabilities. And the men and women were so different. That's what I was always interested in, because I was at a counseling agency. It wasn't an educational thing. And so women had such a much harder time with shame and their self-image and all that. So even if they had the same organizational problems, they were so much more impacted. This was a huge push into this world and get it expanded to include women. It was not like this, and it was not easy. It was a battle. It was not easy.
The other thing you mentioned was your experience around being in your practice with learning disabilities. And I wonder, as a person you're still doing therapy with people, does the understanding about the learning disabilities come later for people when they're diagnosed as adults with the ADHD?
Yeah, sometimes it comes in all different forms. People usually come to see me mostly because, you know, they identify me with ADHD, you know. And so, but back then, the people I saw mostly were diagnosed with dyslexia, and all the things we talked about. Now we sort of separated it out and see as separate almost with the organizational problems. You know, we only saw it under that umbrella of dyslexia. So, I mean, there's a lot of crossover, but I don't actually see that many people with, or they have dyslexia, but it isn't like the same kind of problem for them. Like you're saying, as an adult nowadays, especially, you know, people are using all sorts of tools, and it's, you know, but you know, at that time when I first wrote my book, you know, it did, I saw people with dyslexia, and of course it had a shattering effect on their self-image too. But for women, why I wrote this first book, the organizational problems, the internalization of what the gender roles mean, what they means to be a good mother, wife, friend, sister. And believe it or not, this is 20, 30 years later, the young women I see still feel that, even though they might not say that on the outside. This sense of being different and the sense of having difficulty with these kind of executive function problems, the domestic problems, logistic problems, running a household, taking care of friendships, whatever it is, being a partner, all these things, they feel so bad about it that they really hide. The biggest coping mechanism women use with ADHD is hiding. They hide, they withdraw, they pretend, they mask, and they're just still profoundly afraid of being found out because these things seem so fundamental to who they are as women still. They don't get it from the magazines like we got them when we were younger, but it's the social media is even worse, I suppose, that comparing themselves in these toxic ways.
Ain't that the truth?
So that still continues on, just change forms. Yeah.
Well, the hiding, having read Radical Guide, that's one of the early things that you that gets discussed in that book is about hiding, or masking, or
Pretending.
Withdrawing.
We could come up with lots of but so you can't really judge from the outside when you meet a woman with. I just read you my favorite quote because I have this here. I love this. This to me is very poignant. I used it at a conference once and it says it all. It's by Shel Silverstein. It's called Masks. And because to me, one of the big goals of all this is to open up and to learn to let some people, the right people who you might be like you in some way, know who you are so you can be connected. It just says a few short lines, but she had blue skin and so did he. He kept it hid and so did she. They searched for blue their whole life through, then passed right by and never knew. To me, it's so poignant that you might have these people around you who might, be like you in certain ways, but you've learned to, withdraw so much that you never know who might be out there. So that's why starting with these ADD groups and sometimes can be a way in to letting people know you.
I imagine even if it's not said to us, that people around us miss us when we withdraw.
Yeah, exactly. But we haven't learned other coping skills, especially women. They haven't. So they haven't learned, in a lot of my books talk about communication, not telling everything to everybody, but learning how to, in Journeys, we talk about protecting and connecting at the same time, learning to protect yourself, but also not to do it by sacrificing connection, learning how to say, hey, when you're in a group of people, instead of just like going away, just say, hey, I need a few minutes to, and want to be back in a few minutes.
But what a difference it makes. I'm taking a few minutes for myself, I'm just going to get some fresh air.
Yeah.
Versus
disappearing.
Where did that person go?
Exactly.
What's going on over there? Yeah.
And when you're so filled with shame, though, and embarrassment and guilt, and you just panic. It's like a little bit of a panic attack. You don't know how to talk about this because it's very hard for other people to understand executive function problems. It's very hard for you as a woman. It's very hard for you to explain it to people who live with you, but to people who don't really know you that well, it's very hard to explain things that for other people are just sort of automatic and easy and they're not a big deal. And so it's sort of a topsy-turvy world for women with ADHD, especially like what's easy for you if you're smart, like twice exceptional women. It's very smart, but they have these difficulties and these things that seem ordinary for other people. So it's like topsy-turvy. You can have all these great strengths, but things that seem simple to other people, or things you believe should be simple are not. A lot of women and girls, they don't get diagnosed early enough because if they're smart, or if they're living in a structured environment, parents taking care of them, or they have a lot of support, or they internalize their difficulties when they're younger instead of acting them out, they don't really show. It's hard to understand them. And by the time they get diagnosed, often with depression or anxiety by then, nobody, they don't understand that some of these things are secondary to having this primary attentional issue. And so, by then they have a really distorted sense of self and really see themselves through a really narrow lens and only judge themselves by the things that are difficult for them, versus, we talked about this earlier privately, the wholeness, sing themselves, yes, I have these issues and I have these difficulties, and I'm also this person, these core traits. I'm all of this. And the goal is to be able to carry that whole picture, not just flip flap, bad, good, flip flap back and forth. To be able to, wholeness means healing, means to restore to wholeness, I always say, or I learned. And so to me, that's the goal, is to see yourself as a whole person.